Well, good morning. I'm Jeff Coleman.
And I'm Debra Pinkerton. Welcome to Morning Light.
Well, today marks 80 years since the commencement of the Battle of Iwo Jima, a costly battle which saw some 24,000 American casualties and more than 6,000 American lives lost. It also left us with that unforgettable image of heroic Marines raising the flag over the Japanese island. We are forever grateful.
That is certainly for sure. Well, in just a moment, our Morning Light panel will go behind the headlines. But first, here's a preview of what's coming up later in the show. This is American Heart Month, a time when everyone is encouraged to focus on their cardiovascular health.
That's why you're wearing red today.
Absolutely. We will talk to a doctor about the risks and symptoms of heart disease. Plus, meet a Pennsylvania woman who survived what is called a widowmaker heart attack. Hear how her faith played a key role in her recovery.
It's a powerful story. Well, this morning we're taking a step back from the headlines to examine how this fast, ever-flowing river of information is changing our interactions with regular people at work, at church, even passing each other on the street. A British researcher calls it popcorn brain. That's the constant demand for new, more stimulating news. We're processing more and faster, but so often not going very deep. Do you find that to be the case?
That is the case.
And patience with others is growing thin. We'll talk about this phenomenon this morning.
That's right. Everyone is wanting to know what the very latest is. They're checking their phones. You know, what's the latest headline?
Not me.
Not me. I don't know about you. Well, you've probably experienced this. A birthday reminder pops up on Facebook, but you realize
sorry.
that person passed away a year ago or even longer, or friends tag deceased friends or family as a way of keeping them alive. By the end of this century, there will be billions of accounts for dead Facebook users.
A strange thought.
Very sad. A virtual online cemetery. If you identify as a Christian, what clues are you liking, sharing, and posting to tell future generations what you believe? What's your digital legacy?
Now, you're not going to have to go very deep or far to find out what we thought, what we saw, where we were during the course of a day.
That's right, especially if you're using your phone.
Yeah,
right.
Put the phone away. And in 1900, the Saturday Evening Post was bemoaning the way technology was killing our attention span. The telephone, the newspaper, the phonograph, and then, of course, those pesky railroad and steamship communications were creating what the magazine called greater impatience. So how do we find ways to build a refuge for deep thought and deeper relationship? We'll take these questions to the Morning Light panel this morning. And I've got three experts, thankfully, who practice deep, reflective thought all day long. You
just call me popcorn.
John Wetzel,
Yes.
the king of popcorn brain, indeed. Good to have you, sir. Yeah. Cynthia Lyons, always
Morning.
a delight to have you.
Thank you.
And the president of the Pennsylvania Family Institute, Michael Geer. It's an honor to have you back.
Thanks, great to be back.
It's about time. I mean, let's just, thanks for making time.
Sure, absolutely.
Let's talk about this phenomena. You, before your current role, had a background in news. You were a news producer, and you dealt with this half-hour clock where you had to fit all of the 24-hour news. That is not the case anymore. It's not just that half hour at the evening news, it's all day long. What's happening to information? What do we once?
I was talking to somebody here this morning who used to work at the same TV station that I worked at in Pittsburgh, but many years later, and just the difference between we had a noon news, 6 o'clock news, 11 o'clock news, and the rest of the day was kind of, oh, good, I don't have to pay attention to this kind of stuff. And if you got the newspaper in the morning, you read that. But the rest of filling your day with, I wonder what the latest is, is, and to talk to this person here, on the team here, who worked there years later, the 24-hour news cycle, just churning stuff out is really, I can understand people saying, have the popcorn brain. What's been going on in Washington, what's going on just in this since the inauguration. People are saying, I can't keep up with the news. I got to check in several times a day, see what's the latest thing going on. And I'm not sure that's entirely helpful in terms of how we live our lives.
So from a spiritual standpoint, what is that? Why do our hearts want so much information? What's your thought? I know everyone's wondering, but what do you think?
We're naturally curious, but the other part of it is the way you pulled out your phone a minute or so ago, and the algorithms are set up to know what is what picks at your brain, what you're looking at, and sort of things. And so we have these kind of a capability of knowing what triggers people and pulls them in that way. It's kind of unfortunate that that news isn't just let's get information out, but it's how do I get you drawn into what I'm saying.
Right.
And that's really problematic, quite honestly.
So Cynthia, when you hear a scripture like, Paul talks about whatsoever things are true, whatsoever things are pure, noble, right? Think on these things. Is it more difficult, do you think, to do that when you have to decide? You're sifting through things that are true, false, true, false, true, false, and not necessarily thinking that deeply about whether or not it's a good source, whether it's real, whether it's fake?
Yeah, I think it is difficult because what's available and what's not readily available. And I think you made a good point in that we're now attached to a phone or a computer that actually knows what our thoughts are. I look up whether or not I'm going to buy a refrigerator, and the only thing that I see is how many refrigerators are out there. I look at...
You need a smart refrigerator
that tells
you.
That's probably true. Yeah, that's probably true. Or whatever the news of the day is. So instead of having John know, as a friend, what are we doing? How are things going today? The phone knows. Because we have that interaction and we are lacking the interaction between people. Not always, but a lot of times because our phones are more readily available sometimes.
So, John, people that have worked with you understand that you are high energy. You are moving in multiple places at a time. People might even watching TV now sense your restlessness and wanting to answer this question.
What do you mean?
What does this do? What is technology? You take a person like you or a teenager who's got your personality and throw technology into them. What's it doing?
I'm trying not to giggle about teenager with my personality, which is every teenager in the world, I think, except the mature ones.
4 or 5 of them.
It's insidious for a guy like me. I mean, it was very adaptive when I ran 27 prisons simultaneously in a bunch of parole districts. It's insidious. And when you look at, I've been doing a lot of studying of the ancient church. Every lesson has temperance in it. And I thought I was good if you didn't drink, but it means temperance. And so you think of something.
Unpack the
so
idea of
temperance means temperance in everything, in our behavior, in all kinds of ways. Like just
everything that's good is not
just
good
not
all
being
the time.
Extreme. And then when you think about having something that can give you talk about an algorithm, give a kid as much as they want, unguided necessarily by the church or by these lessons. This is really the description of the way that the devil, the evil ones, draw people in by giving you more and more of the negative stuff in your life. So it really is. The temperance is difficult lesson for a guy like me, but it's really important to really meter what comes in and what quality, and you have access to all kinds of quality if you don't have a filter for that.
Yeah.
You could accept everything, which is really insidious.
I was going to say, I was in a classroom last week. And one of the students, we're at Paul Meier, they're not allowed to have their phones anymore. So they're allowed to have it at lunch in like the last 2 minutes of each class.
So cruel.
And so one of the boys had it as they were sort of leaving and said to another guy, "How's that possible? I've been on the phone for 12 hours in a 24-hour period of time." And some are going to be more than that, but every time they touch that phone, it starts to record. And to an old lady like me, I think, wow, that's a lot. But it's very easy to get drawn in there very quickly.
Yeah, we do a youth leadership conference at Pennsylvania Family Institute, have for 25 years, called City on the Hill. And for that whole week, the students are living in a dorm, and then we spend time at the Capitol and things. One of the things we've done from the very first time, and as technology has increased, we've had to do more of it, is we tell the students you are not to have your cell phone with you. We used to say you can't have an MP3 player, all of these other things, the input that they're consistently having. And the person who does a presentation to get them to turn in their cell phones at the beginning of the week says, just want to let you know you will not die not having your cell phone. And it's almost withdrawal with some of the kids in terms of the addiction that they have. And adults too. It's not just kids, right? It's not just kids.
Let me make it unanimous. The healthiest culture I'm around is the Elko football program. Anyone who's played football at Elko under Bob Miller knows when you walk inside the door, there's a big cooler, and it's for your phone. Kids come early and stay late. They gravitate towards being present with people. We have to give them the opportunity to do that.
So, Saturday Evening Post in 1900 was talking about all these new technologies that were causing us to lose attention spans. And back then, that meant you could only focus on a few hours at a time. As now we're down to the goldfish rule. We're in seconds where we can't focus. let's think about the broader picture here of what we're leaving behind, what our digital footprint is, what we're posting, what we're saying. 100 years from now, what are people going to be saying about us, Michael? And how do we right the ship so that we leave something good and noble and true and right and pure for next generation to look at?
Well, some of it is just patience in terms of not having to respond to everything that we see. The idea is that, or the thought is, oftentimes you see something you don't like or whatever, you need to comment back. And so I think everybody needs to sort of, the term we use here, pump the brakes a little bit in terms of, do I have to respond to everything that I see? And if we do feel the need to respond to things that we see, troubles in society, the better way to respond is to actually do something, not say something.
Do you find prayers helpful at that point?
Well, yeah, I do. As I was contemplating coming on my way over here, the scripture that came to my mind is from the book of Isaiah. I think it's 26:3 that says, He will keep in perfect peace those whose minds are set on Him, because we trust in Him. And so that notion of we can get sort of this headline addiction. You don't even read the story. You just see this headline. It makes you think, oh, no, that's awful.
Right.
We need to say, okay, wait a minute. Number one, let's understand the facts. But two, who is in control of history? The scripture tells us that God is the author and perfecter of our faith. And so in the middle of a book, the book is not saying, oh, I wonder what happens here at the end, because the author wrote it. The end is going to be the end, and God is in control of our lives, and we need to trust in Him, and He will give us that perfect peace.
We're going to give your phone number out for people to text you if they need a bit of encouragement for the day. That was very helpful, Cynthia.
I think the key is, take a breath before you start texting. I've also said to other people, why don't you make a physical contact with somebody? I have often, my own heart will go, well, that's not right. You can't put that on there. I've said to my own kids and said to my swimmers, you can work a lifetime of building an amazing reputation, and it takes 5 seconds to tear it down.
That's going to be the final word today. That was a great final word. Thank you, panel, very, very much. Well, do you know the warning signs and symptoms of heart disease? Since this is American Heart Month, we're going to talk with a doctor to discuss ways to lower your risk of having a heart attack. You're watching Morning Light on Lighthouse TV.
February is American Heart Month. Heart disease is the leading cause of death for men and women in the United States. Statistics show one person dies every 33 seconds from cardiovascular disease. So who is at risk for heart disease, and how can it be prevented? Joining me to talk about it is retired family and hospice physician, Dr. Jack Wright. Thank you for being with us.
You're welcome.
So talk to us about heart disease. It's the leading cause of death.
Yes, and it's been that way for several decades. It probably started to increase to the leading cause in the 50s and 60s after World War II, with more smoking, change in our diet, change in our activity, becoming more sedentary. And despite all the advances in heart care that we have with medications and procedures and devices, it's still number one. And it's that way along most of the Western world, really.
So when we say heart disease, it actually can be broken down into a number of different categories. Why don't you go through those with us?
Yes. So the first category that everyone always thinks of is coronary artery disease or coronary heart disease. And this is atherosclerosis of the vessels, the arteries, hardening of the arteries, it used to be called. Then you have congestive heart failure, which is quite prevalent, particularly in the United States. It can be right-sided, it can be left-sided, or both sides at the same time. You can have rhythm problems such as atrial fibrillation, which is becoming much more common, ventricular fibrillation, which is uniformly fatal, and then slow or fast heartbeats. They may require a pacemaker. You can also have valvular disease, which is like the valve is too tight, that's called stenosis, or the valve is too leaky, and that's called regurgitation. And then lastly, this is more rare, but it does occur, you can have infections or inflammations of the heart muscle, and that's myocarditis, or endocarditis, which is infection of the heart lining and the valves.
So all different kinds of heart disease.
Yes.
I guess, what are the risk factors?
Well, there are several risk factors. I think a big one is just being too sedentary, not getting enough exercise, our activity level. poor sleep is, you might not think of that as a risk factor, but if you get less than 6 hours of sleep, it increases your risk for heart disease.
That's amazing. I didn't realize that.
Yeah, and you know, in our lifestyle being so fast and active, it's hard to get that sleep. And as you get older, it's hard to get to sleep. Another major cause that goes along with sleep is sleep apnea, and that can increase your heart attack risk by 500 times. Then our diet is particularly bad: high cholesterol, high salt, high fat, highly processed foods. We eat too much, we're overweight. You'd like to have a BMI at least less than 30. Smoking is a big one. It's still big. And even marijuana smoking, you think, well, that's not as bad as tobacco smoking. But actually, the smoke from marijuana is just as bad as tobacco as far as causing heart disease. And your risk, you have a higher risk of having a heart attack an hour after you smoke marijuana. And if you have a heart attack, it's more likely to be fatal.
Oh my goodness. So lots of risk factors.
A lot of risk factors.
I'm sure in some cases people are shocked to find out that they have heart disease, that they have this diagnosis. How do you weave the gospel into sharing this information with them?
Well, when I was in practice, I would start with people that were starting with heart disease to explain to them how wonderful the heart really is, how God made it. And it starts beating at about 6 weeks of gestation, and it goes the rest of your life. You don't have to tell it what to do. You don't have to think about it. It just adjusts itself. So it's really a miraculous organ. And then with people that have heart disease, God has given mankind a lot of knowledge about medications that He's placed on this earth. He's given us the knowledge for procedures and devices such as placing a valve without cutting someone's chest open, and even up to a heart transplant. It's amazing. Heart transplant survival is much better these days than it used to be. And then lastly, if they're at the end of life with heart disease, and they say, well, you've reached this trial, you don't have anywhere else to turn, you really need to turn to your Heavenly Father. And if they have a faith, we try to encourage them in their faith, get their family along, and if they have a church family, that's also very helpful to support them.
Certainly, and technology has come so far, and it really is amazing, but there are things that you can do to actually prevent having heart disease.
Yes. I think one of the big things is just to be active. Now, the recommendation officially is 30 minutes of aerobic exercise 5 times a week. That's quite daunting, and I think a lot of people can't do it. They just physically can't do it. But if you can walk for even 10 minutes a day or do chair exercises, it helps. You need to watch your diet. Try to focus more on low cholesterol foods, lean meats like eggs, protein like eggs and fish, chicken. Cut down the portion size. Eating with a smaller plate is helpful. If you can cut your portion size down within 2 weeks, your stomach actually gets a little smaller and it doesn't take as much to get as full. Know your blood pressure, know your cholesterol level, your glucose level. Try to get 8 hours of sleep a day if you can. And if you think you have sleep apnea, where you're excessively sleepy during the day, you wake up frequently at night, you snore till the paint peels off the walls, or you wake up with a headache or a dry mouth, try to get evaluated for sleep apnea, because even people that appear to be totally healthy can still have it. Yeah. And lastly, work on stress and anxiety and depression.
Yeah. That's certainly some great advice. And if you're feeling anything, contact your doctor or call 911. Doctor, thank you so much for being here and sharing this information, this very important information.
Yes, it is.
And coming up next on Morning Light, a Pennsylvania woman was the perfect picture of health. She exercised, dieted, but still had a heart attack. She will share her story of survival and how her faith helped her through the recovery process. We are back in 1 minute. Welcome back. A healthy person can have a heart attack. A Pennsylvania woman is proof of that. Carol Fastrich Aranos exercised regularly, ate well, but still had what is called a widowmaker heart attack. Carol is here to share her story with us. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
Why don't you take us back to June of 2022? What happened?
Yes, so I got up and ran out the door for my morning walk and was walking up a hill and started to experience some heaviness on my chest. And it was just odd. It was just not something I had experienced before, and I was exhausted. So I called my husband to come and pick me up. He recommended that I call the ambulance, which I told him I didn't need. but I knew there was something wrong. So I called the ambulance, saving my own life. And by the time my husband and the ambulance got there, I was passed out on the pavement. I had a widowmaker heart attack and arrived at the hospital, and within minutes I went into cardiac arrest and died. And after they resuscitated me, they emergently placed 3 cardiac stents.
Oh my goodness. After you woke up and you realized what happened, what was your reaction?
I was just so grateful. I just knew that God was on in that situation from the moment it started. 100% of the time I walk out the door and go right, and this morning I walked left. And it put me closer to the hospital. It put me in a place where I could be found easily by the ambulance because I was in the front of the tennis courts. He sent an angel to remind me that I was going to be okay. And, you know, I have no brain damage, physical damage, heart damage, and I just think by his grace and mercy I am here. And so I'm just so grateful.
Oh, so blessed. When they told you that you died, what was your reaction?
I actually didn't even realize that I died. In kind of a funny way, I tell everybody that, you know, I just slipped away. One of the nurses who I think God sent me to tell me I was going to be okay literally came right up to me, and she looked me straight in the eye and she said, "I want you to know you're going to be okay." Those were her exact words. And I just slipped away. And I didn't know that I died until I heard the nurses talking in the cardiac cath lab when they were placing the stents about them shocking me. And so I had to ask my husband for verification, you know, did I really die? And he did confirm that I did. And it was like I just didn't even know it.
Oh my goodness. And what did the doctors say to you?
You know, of course I was completely befuddled because we have heart disease running in our family. So my whole life has been a journey to not go down that path. I was only 55 when I had this heart attack, and I was literally the picture of health. You know, they just kept chalking it up to family history, which, you know, it's almost 3 years later, and I'm still in kind of confusion and almost denial because I just don't understand how it could have happened. But, you know, God sends us on journeys so that we can touch other people and that we can share our stories like I am today, and, you know, that we can impact other people's lives and their journey.
Now, what type of impact do you have or do you hope to have with others by sharing this story?
Yeah, I would say 3 things. I would say 100% of the time, take your cell phone when you're exercising. I mean, it saved my life. Number 2, I would say, if you are not living your best life, take one step toward better health, and be aware of your body so that when something, you know, bad happens, that you can, you know, take the steps to save yourself. And then number 3, I would just say, you know, we don't know when it's our time. And so if you don't know the love and peace of Jesus Christ, that you would just seek him with all of your heart.
We were just looking at some wonderful pictures with you and your family, and you are so blessed. And continue sharing your story with others. It will have an impact.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being with us. And so glad you're doing wonderful.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
And stay with us. We will be right back. Welcome back. Coming up tomorrow on Morning Light, more than 3 billion people have likely never heard the name Jesus. But ABWE, Association of Baptists for World Evangelism, is working to change that. Their goal? Fulfill the Great Commission by not only sharing the gospel, but also by discipling new believers. And that's a look at what's coming up tomorrow on Morning Light. Now, Jeff, your closing thoughts.
There's no greater mission or vision. Well, it wasn't a given black pilots would be offered the right to fly for their country in World War II, but thanks in part to a persistent First Lady, Eleanor Roosevelt, allowing herself to be flown by a black training pilot at Tuskegee, they earned that right. The Tuskegee Airmen were born. 1,500 combat missions, 15 Bronze Stars, 8 Purple Hearts, and 96 Distinguished Flying Crosses. They came home to an America not yet ready to offer full tribute, a nation still locked in the wicked grip of segregation, even in churches. Decades later, an American president, George W. Bush, would publicly salute the airmen at the White House to atone for all the unreturned salutes and unforgivable indignities. A few years ago, on a street in Pennsylvania's capital city, a muralist unveiled his 2-story mural dedicated to the son of a Pennsylvania member of the Tuskegee Airmen, Charles Petty Sr. You can see it today. Pay tribute to them because it's never too late to say thank you. For Debra and the entire Morning Light team, I'm Jeff Coleman. Thanks for watching. Check on your neighbors. We'll see you tomorrow morning.